Hi, how's it going? I'm Mike from Australia, and this is the English Breakthrough for Germans podcast. In this podcast, I help German speakers who feel stuck with their English to give you an alternative to learning apps, Volkshochschule courses, and if you feel that your school English wasn't enough, by discussing effective learning strategies to help you become an independent language learner. I have been teaching English for 12 years and German for 5 years now, so I teach both languages. Mir fallen die Worte nicht ein, das sagen viele meiner Kursteilnehmer. Und wenn du das auch manchmal zu deinem Englisch sagst, dann bist du hier genau richtig. Ein bilinguales Transkript dieses Podcasts ist jetzt auf meinem Patreon kostenlos erhältlich. Einen Link dazu findest du in der Episodenbeschreibung. Okay, and for those who really want to practice their listening skills, I've also made a Lückentext, an additional transcript with some of the words removed, so you can read along and test your listening skills at the same time. And apart from German, which I speak at C2 level, I have also learned Spanish, a little Bulgarian, and I'm now learning French. Okay, let's get started. Last week, in the first of 2 parts of how I learned German, I talked about what strategies I used before I came to Germany. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about what I did once I moved to Germany in 2011. At the end, I'm going to go more into teacher mode, and I'll tell you why I think the things that I did worked so well. So in 2011, I moved to Berlin. When I arrived, I was far from fluent and I couldn't really speak well. But I was really keen to study German, so I kept studying and wanted to keep studying while I was here. I was living in a share house or a flat share, a WG, and I knew that I wanted to understand and be able to speak German with my 2 flatmates. So I started by taking an intensive course. For some reason, they put me in a B2 class, which was actually too high for me, but I settled into the class, and from there I took 2 months of intensive classes. But that's actually all I did in terms of formal German lessons in the classroom. When I was in Australia, I took a class for 2 hours a week for 1 year in 2010. And then when I arrived in 2011 in Germany, I did 2 months of intensive courses. 2 months of intensive classes. So everything else I did, I taught myself using learning strategies that I will talk about today. So I remember after I finished the German courses, it really frustrated me when people switched to English and didn't give me a go. They didn't give me a chance to try and communicate in German. Actually, I felt really judged when that happened. And I desperately wanted people to see that I was doing my best to learn the language. It was as though people couldn't see that I was hardworking and really wanted to be able to speak the language. I now realize that it was probably more because many other English speakers live here and they don't speak the language. So it is normal that people with an English accent can't actually speak German so fluently, or people that have an English accent when they speak German. But it was really after my German classes that when I started reading, that my German really took off. I first found some books which were short stories, and then afterwards I started to read books which were longer. It was important to me that I could understand the majority of the text without too many unknown words slowing me down. One book which really helped me was Daniel Tammet's book, Born on a Blue Day. Daniel Tammet has autism. He is a polyglot who claims to have learned 10 languages, and he set the European record for reciting the number pi, 3.14, from memory to over 22,000 decimal places. I was so fascinated by this book that it was really great. It was a really great book to read for me in German. I found that the language was simpler to understand, and because I was interested in the topic and the things that he talked about in the book, that made it really motivating for me. But I would say the biggest thing for me in my German learning journey was learning with the Harry Potter books. Excuse me. I read all 7 books in German, and a friend of mine also gave me the audiobooks, so I was able to listen and read at the same time. This really helped me with my pronunciation. I really wanted to be able to speak along with the recording. I wanted to copy the intonation, to have the same pronunciation as Rufus Beck, the speaker of the audiobooks. I think it took me about 14 months in total to read all of the books, all 7 books, which was an average of 1 book every 2 months. And around this time, I remember impressing people with words from Harry Potter like Umriss, Volltreffer, Spähen, and phrases like mit ihr ist nicht gut Kirschen essen, which was about the headmaster in Harry Potter. I will never forget this vocabulary and where I learned it. So reading and also reading aloud became an important part of what I was doing to get fluent. So reading aloud, how did I use this? Well, sometimes I would go for a couple of days without speaking German. I had friends that I spoke English to. So let's say it was maybe 5 or 6 days and I hadn't spoken German. If I knew I had a meeting that afternoon at work, then in the morning, I would take a book like Harry Potter and I would read a section aloud. And I knew that this would get my brain warmed up and thinking in German for later when I have the meeting. And also later, around this time, I liked noticing bits of pronunciation. For example, I remember the first time that I heard the pronunciation wirklich for wirklich. And I also remember the exact moment that I heard a speaker say nun instead of einen, right? Like, hast du mal einen Moment or something like that. Hast du mal einen Moment frei? Instead of einen. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in the podcast, but I also play music. So I play guitar and trumpet. And a big part of playing music for me is listening. It's working out what I'm hearing and then repeating it. So this was also a big part of my language learning, listening and repeating. I didn't think twice about whether or not I should listen and repeat. I just did it because that was what I did in music. So in a flat share that I was living in, it annoyed me that I couldn't really follow my 2 flatmates when they were speaking in German. So I decided to try and find DVDs which I could watch and I could read the subtitles at the same time. I knew that there was a lot of words that I was missing, so when my flatmates spoke, there were things that I wasn't understanding. And after a while, I realized that one of my flatmates quite often used the word irgendwie and halt a lot, which made listening harder. But once I knew and realized that these were just filler words, it became easier. So watching movies with the subtitles really helped me to work out what I was hearing and understanding and what I wasn't, because you can see the word on the screen. So that's it. I read books, I listened to the audiobook, I copied the pronunciation, and I watched movies in German with subtitles in German. So I did a lot more than just practice speaking in conversation. So I did also practice speaking, of course, at work and with some friends and colleagues that I had. But speaking wasn't the only thing that I was doing to improve my German. And I think that's a really, really important point. So now I'm going to go into teacher mode and explain a little more about why I think these strategies were effective for me. So I've mentioned this, I think, before, maybe last week. When you watch something, generally, when you don't understand a word, there are 2 reasons why you haven't understood. Reason number 1 is you don't know the word. Reason number 2 is you don't know the word, but you didn't understand. Number 2 is you do know the word, but you didn't understand the pronunciation. Okay, so when you watch a video with subtitles, you can see immediately which words you didn't understand from the pronunciation. Often, words are commonly pronounced in ways that you might not expect. So fahren in German becomes fahren, sagen becomes sagen, einen becomes nen. So in English, things like going to become gonna, want to become wanna, and things like that. I will becomes I'll. I have done becomes I've done. And it's only when you listen actively and read at the same time that you can hear these things and hear this happening. But here's another thing that I've since realized about my journey, which I think is critical for language learning. This is an area in which all language courses, apps, and AI tools will not be able to help you with. When I was reading Harry Potter, I formed a connection to the different characters in the book. And this is really, really important for language learning. I remember it was the cool Weasley brothers who said the word Volltreffer when somebody guessed the right answer. I'll never forget that. And that Hagrid often used sentences without a subject, like, hätte ein Drachenhändler sein können. Or, könnte mal vorgekommen sein. And vocabulary like keuchte, hinüberrannte, spähte zu ihr hinüber are not things that are spoken language. So those last examples are things that are used for the narrative, but not in actual conversation. And these examples helped me develop my intuition about what kind of language is used and by who, what kind of vocabulary, what kind of grammar. So what kind of character in terms of age, education, background, male, female, upper class, working class, etc. What kind of people use what kind of vocabulary? And this is simply something that apps and even language classes really, really struggle to give you a feeling about. So if you want to be fluent in a language, you need to have automatic certainty about what kind of vocabulary you should use in which contexts. And reading books like this, like Harry Potter, with many different characters, can help you make the right choices so you're not just translating from German. Harry Potter is quite difficult for many. There are, of course, other examples like graded readers in English. So they are like A2, B1 readers that you can find from Oxford and Cambridge and brands like that. So in order to develop your skills in a language, you need to read. And you need to read aloud regularly so that when you read silently, you're more actively activating the sound of the language in your mind. I now also know that reading is actually a big problem for learners. This is because it's possible to understand a text without really being able to pronounce it. So if an English speaker sees a sentence, ich studiere an der Universität, in meinem Kurs sind schon 500 Studenten, they are likely to be able to understand the sentence and say, I study at university. In my course, there are 500 students. But that's not because they can pronounce the German words correctly. It's because studieren and study look similar. Universität and university sound similar. So you automatically understand these words, even though you can't pronounce them in the language. So it's often an illusion that we have successfully engaged with the language when all we have done is use our first language to understand foreign texts. This is why in the beginning, it's essential that you use audio with the text so you can be sure that you are hearing an English accent in your mind when you are silent reading and not a German accent reading the English words. So which books should you choose? You should find books which are easy to read so you can become more fluent in reading. I would recommend you go down 2 levels for reading. So if you're approximately B1, read A1 books. If you think you're around B2, read A2, etc. Okay, let's summarize the strategies I used, which I highly recommend that you use as well. 1, I prioritized the sound of the language over the written form. Sound is more important than text. 2, this comes from the last episode of the podcast, I watched kids shows in German, and this really, really helped with my comprehension. 3, I read books which were suitable for my level. 4, I used the audiobooks and tried to speak along with the audio. This is called shadowing, Schattensprechen. Number 5, I actively tried to notice when people were using interesting pronunciation. So as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, there's now a bilingual transcript of the podcast, as well as a version with gaps, so you can practice your listening skills. So you can head over to my new Patreon website for that. So there's a link in the podcast description. This week at my Patreon page, if you find the post to this week's podcast, you can answer the question, what strategies have you used that you've found to be effective? And if you have any other questions about the podcast, you can post them on my Patreon as well. That's it. Thanks very much for listening. I hope to have you here again next week. Bye.